Welcome to Chapter 13. Today we want to talk about managing the network. We want to talk about designing the network. And really this chapter talks about how people contribute to all this technology that we were discussing throughout the semester. In the past we talked about encoding, like Manchester encoding. We talked about Hamming code. We talked about all these systems that machines perform. See, when you plug in the wires, Ethernet takes place inside of wires and machines. Today we're talking about what people do, how people design, monitor the network, and where the jobs really fit into this entire discussion. So later on, as our assignment today, you will be researching the local job market to see what jobs are available for network management, for a network analysis, and related jobs. One thing I do want to mention, though, before we get started is this information on demand for Linux skills. Okay, as technology goes forward, open source is playing a larger role. And here's a nice article discussing how this specific operating system becomes a large part of many, many networks. And if you use any of the major cloud computing systems like Amazon, Google, and others, they're all based on Linux. And so that's why the demand here is mentioned in this very recent article. All right, so let's go ahead and switch to the subject matter for today's discussion. And we'll start with this nice graphic of a circle. This process you probably use all the time, even in your personal life. If you consider buying a product, okay, you do that because you have a need. So what you did is you did some first discovering of that need, then you do some planning. Can I build something by myself, or do I have to buy a product to fill this need? Then likely you analyzed your need, you analyzed also what the solution might be. Maybe even you took a look at the market where which store would have the best product to match. You also analyze your budget. Hey, how much money can I really spend on this? And then through the design phase, maybe you have looked at your schedule and hey, I can be at the store around this time. Also, maybe there are 2 or 3 stores available. This is my route. This is how it fits. And then you implemented this. And then you made the purchase, and now you have something to maintain, right? Until a new need arises, and you go through that again. So we do that all the time in personal lives. But in IT, this kind of software or system development lifecycle happens all the time as well. And as you get hired into a company, you might be entering this process at any point. A lot of times hirings take place when a new project is underway and then there is a need for resources, right? So then maybe you're entering at the analysis stage or maybe even at the implementation. A lot of times, though, we look at maintenance as sort of the beginning. So what happens in the maintenance stage?
You already have the purchase, you're investing in keeping it running.
Yes, so you keep it running. So there may be emergencies that take place. Maybe you are doing some routine operations for tuning, but maintenance is really the stage where you get this return on investment. So when you are running it, it's like being in a car, right? While you're running it, that's where you get the benefit from it. It's not when it's at the mechanics getting fixed up, but that's where maintenance is the place where we're really getting some return. So planning and analysis and design, okay, usually would indicate that there's a project underway, and there are actually jobs titled analyst. It can be a telecom analyst, it can be a programming analyst, and an analyst, as the name suggests, is going to look at a problem and take it apart. Right? Analysis is to take things apart, and synthesis is to put them together. And as you analyze a problem, it's like with blocks of Lego, you take it apart so that later, out of those same Legos, you can create something new, you can create a solution. Once you understand the problem to more detail, you analyze it, you can then come up with with a design for whatever solution you're looking for. Has anybody taken our system analysis class, the 224? Okay, right. So you've gone through this cycle probably a few times, and you're familiar with some of details of how it works. So let's say that there is an upgrade needed. Let's say it's our Blackboard system, and we are in the maintenance phase, which means that it's running. Sometimes it's down. Most of the time it's up. But we are going to consider first the upgrade. And before we make the decision to upgrade, we are in a planning stage. We have to decide, are the benefits of the new system so high that we want to take the risk with this process? We want to spend the money on the upgrade, right? We might want to consider, are we currently in some kind of vulnerability? If our system has security issues, then it doesn't really matter how much it costs. We need to seriously consider the upgrade. Okay. What other things can we consider when considering an upgrade? What other thoughts would go through your mind when doing this kind of planning?
Well, you should absolutely do it.
Yeah. So do we upgrade or do we not? Because not upgrading oftentimes is a valid way of doing things. In the past, we discussed this curve. If you recall, the curve of maybe something like this, where we have the early majority and late majority. So here is, all right, here's the time, and we have the early majority, okay, and this is the late majority, and then somewhere here at the top are the early adopters. Okay, early adopters, people who are standing in front of the AT&T store whenever the new iPhone comes out, right, in line. They need to be the first ones. As you're considering an upgrade, what are the risks involved with early adoption?
Bugs haven't all been worked out.
Yeah, so there might be bugs. You might be the first one to actually have the new system, and there are markets where that's important. Maybe you are a store, and there's a new buying feature or a possibility of using a new type of credit card. If you can be one of the first ones, that may give you a competitive edge, all right? But early adoption typically has risks involved with that. So the best place to be is this early majority, because it means that you didn't just go on the bleeding edge with all the bugs and problems, but you also did not wait so long as to have your system be old. And when the system is old, there are issues with that. It's harder to integrate. It costs more to actually run it because sometimes it's harder to get a hold of engineers and programmers that know that system. And there's yet another section here at the very end. Okay, anything going this way, it's going to be legacy. And so when you have legacy systems, that's even more expensive, and it can have serious security issues because now patches are not being even made for that. So being this early majority right here, being early majority is going to be the best approach for our system. Okay, let's switch back. So that's planning. And once we've analyzed the situation, we consider the system itself. Maybe not all modules have to be upgraded, maybe just some of them. You see, once you've analyzed the benefits and the risks, you can choose a different way of upgrading. Then we have the design phase, and something about design phase is that it's often skipped in IT. Let me give you an example. Let's say a programmer is sitting down to a software piece, and he has a set of requirements. Okay, what do you think is the first thing that he should be doing?
Asking if it's already been done.
Okay, you can ask if it's already been done, yes. But you know, you have requirements written out. One of the things that he would like to do is jump into the coding right away. But if you know anything about programming, there is a design phase that can be implemented first with these little charts, the flow charts, right? And you would want to do a flowchart first so that you can see the overall structure of the software piece before you actually jump in the code. Jumping in the code is nice because you start coding and you feel good about it, all right? Now, here's why design phases are good for us and why it's cheaper to do the design phases than not to. Imagine that you're building an apartment building, maybe a skyscraper, all right? And you started building it, and the lake is on the east side of the building. And the owner comes, you know, the project sponsor is coming along, and he says, well, I want the lake on the other side. But you've already started building it, right? It's much more difficult and much more expensive, not impossible, much more expensive to move this building somewhere else. Which is why if you were to create a design, maybe even a prototype, right, where you maybe do a mock-up of this, then have that approved, much cheaper to move that building while it's in the design phase, you know, around the lake. So that's why when programming, it's easier to move modules around when the code is not yet written, or when you create a network to move the pieces around before they are actually start to be implemented, and then you realize that some issues have come along. So then we move to implementation phase, and in the implementation phase we have a number of options. We can do a parallel implementation, which means that we keep both systems running at the same time. Now, that type of implementation has great advantages. For example, here on campus in the summer, we're going to do a parallel implementation of Blackboard, of the new Blackboard system. And that's what it looks like, okay, the new Blackboard. And we will run the old system and the new system next to it. Some people were selected to participate in the pilot, and they will have their classes in the new system. What are the advantages of having a pilot type parallel implementation? Comparison, yes. So you can clearly see the differences at the end, as the end user.
Figure out features that really are helpful to the user.
Right. Because it's already running in production, you actually have some real users on the system, so you can really test it well and figure out which features are important. Yeah. Okay, easier to find bugs. It might be more painful though, because you have the real users, you know, using them. But yes, you'll find bugs. Now think about what happens if this totally burns, right? We still have the other system running. We can fall back on it. Yeah. It could be, yeah. So if you end up comparing the code on both the old system and the new system, you can maybe easier find bugs. Yeah, that will be the case. Also, something that's interesting about the parallel implementation is that it's rather expensive. You have to have two sets of infrastructure, see? Oftentimes you have to double up on the help desk because you have two different systems you're supporting in production. So those are some of the issues with that. What other implementation strategies are you aware of? Okay, you can do a beta, and beta in a way would be, well, it's done oftentimes in a parallel system where you maybe are beta the new system, but you keep the old one running, right? But beta is a way to implement things when it's their very first appearance. So hey, we don't know if it's going to work or not. It's version 0.9. And you go ahead and put it as beta so people's expectations are somehow managed. Yeah. Any other implementation types? Piecemeal, yeah. So with piecemeal, you might choose specific modules that you're upgrading only, not the whole thing. Yeah, any other ones? Sandbox, sure. So with a sandbox, we would have a small system, usually disconnected from other systems, a way to play with a system. Yeah, so so a sandbox would fit in. Any other ones? What's the main type of implementation where you wake up one morning and everything is upgraded? Yeah, like plunge or cutover, and other people call it Hail Mary. Basically, what you do is you upgrade your main system, and the next day the new system is available. And that's very common for upgrades. Here's how to do this safely, okay? To do such upgrades safely, you have to have a development environment first that's separate from production. In a development environment, you do the first upgrade and you see what broke. You correct for those issues, and you play in this development environment as much as you can. It's sort of like a sandbox. You see a lot of errors in the development environment, and that's okay. Then, once you figured it out in development, you move it to another environment, a third one, called test. And in the test environment, you invite users to come in and log in. You should see very few errors in a test environment. Sometimes the test environment is called staging, as if it's right before production, or QA, quality assurance. Okay? So then, once everything is working in test, you have a level of confidence that when you do this plunge, the cutover, you've already practiced for it. So there shouldn't be surprises. All right? Okay, so that's a way to implement systems. All right, let's skip to another picture here. And now we have example of a network map. These maps are more at the design phase. They're created at the design phase, but they help us to, number one, document our network. Why would you want to document the network? If something breaks, if San Antonio goes offline, right, how would you know which connection is broken? Yeah, so you can see that LA is connected via two links. So by the time LA goes down, two links have to be down, right? So these designs will help you to troubleshoot the network, okay? But also, this documentation is created for business continuity. There's this well-known saying of someone being hit by a bus. You go to the meeting and people always worry about you that you're going to die. You know, what if Simon is hit by a bus? So that's why you create documentation, so that when someone else is hired, they can come in and sort of understand what happens without having to memorize all of it from scratch. So documentation is good from that perspective. Another reason for creating these graphs is when you need to make a case to a vice president or to a manager, they will understand those pictures better than your abstract explanations. Oh, this router, it's a single point of failure, and you explain, and they don't make any sense. Because later on, they'll take your drawings, and they'll take it to cabinet or some other discussions, and they will actually be able to tell you, hey, can you tell the difference between LA and San Antonio? We need another line going from San Antonio maybe to Seattle. And everybody understands that when it is on, in writing like this. So this is one example of a map. Another common example would be this time of a local area network where we use a mixture of pictures and text and so forth. Oftentimes you will use Visio for this, and these icons, as they are right here, they're not standardized. Often with network design, there are some standard icons involving routers with arrows pointing inside. Let's see if I can bring up some standard network design. All right, let's see. Okay, so here's an example of the standard icon for a router with the arrows inside. Let's see if we can. Let's see. As you can see, a lot of times they use the actual pictures. Okay, this looks pretty good right here. Okay, so the routers would be circles with arrows. We have ATM switch, which has a standard design on it. So there are certain icons that have some meaning to them, but I've seen this quite a bit where they actually include just pictures and then connect them. And it helps people to remember how the network is structured, helps with the troubleshooting of the network, and then in redesigning it to maybe increasing disaster recovery capacity into increasing the capacity of the network itself. Okay, in this map, we also have certain properties of the connection, right? So we can provide the speed of the connection and the distance and many other elements right on the map. Okay, so that takes us to another face of IT, and that is the financial side. You see, the finances in IT are very important because most of the stuff is very, very expensive. And one of the ideas used when designing, when planning for projects is how do you budget for them? And here we have an example of a feasibility study. So feasibility will include a technical feasibility, it'll include operational feasibility, but also a financial feasibility. And that's what we're talking about here. And there's an idea out there in the finance world that the present value of a dollar, okay, actually is different in the future. And that is a dollar that we have today, okay, is going to have a lesser value in the future. Now, so how does it work? When I have a dollar today, I can invest it, and therefore today's dollar is more important. It's worth more because over time, you know, you can have more money. But if I say that a year from now I'm going to buy $100,000 network equipment, I actually have to only put away $90,000 today for that. Okay, and so that's the idea that today's dollars are worth more than the ones in the future. And so we use this expression of a discount rate to calculate how much money in the future this actually means what we have currently. And then we have a feasibility study spreadsheet which contains important pieces of information. Number one, in 0 year, so today, we will have to spend $620,000. In parentheses mean that it's a negative number, so you have to spend that much. And then, as you have benefits derived from the equipment and the technology that you implemented, these benefits are going to offset this investment and any operational costs in a set number of years. And in this example, after about 5.5 years, we will pay off the investment. Okay? Here's the problem. These spreadsheets, they look nice when you know the actual benefits derived. But it's sometimes very difficult to put on paper how much money this technology actually is making us. I mean, think about your home computer. How much money are you actually saving or making by having that computer at home? You don't have to go to the post office to mail a bill because you're doing this through the bank, okay? So you're saving 45 cents on every letter. Maybe you don't have to drive somewhere because you can look it up on the computer. So there are some tangible results, okay? But a lot of times with technology, there are intangible benefits that cannot be likened to a dollar. You have the computer in front of you, and therefore you found your next job online much quicker, right? How do you put a dollar amount on that? And so today, when we have IT projects, a lot of times it's very difficult to actually put some kind of a dollar amount or even estimate it well under the benefits derived. But of course, to plan financially, we do these spreadsheets, and they do show some kind of a planning stage for financing. A couple of things that we need to remember about these spreadsheets. One, even though the current dollar is worth more than one in the future, there is inflation involved. Also, IT industry is famous for quickly devaluating technology. So let's say the server today costs $10,000. Well, 5 years from now, it could be $2,000, right? And so when planning the kind of multi-year implementation, oftentimes it's not just the value of the current dollar, but the way the market changes, you will be able to buy this technology much cheaper in the future. All right. Here's another example of our process of implementing new systems, and that is we really need to do a baseline study. So we need to know how our network is performing in order to be able to recommend the new bandwidth, the new equipment, and to try to help folks understand what it is that we're doing. Most people believe that their networks are slow, right? I mean, that's just human nature. They always want things faster. But really, what does it mean for something to be slow? Well, there is a scientific method of figuring this out. You first establish a baseline, so you measure what your network does on a regular day. And then, when everything gets busy, okay, then you can see the difference. All right, and so you can quantify what speed or what bandwidth saturation actually means slow, and what it will take to get this straightened out. Now in this graph, we can see a number of users logged in time, and so 8 in the morning everybody shows up for work, and so that's why we have a spike. Right then, it seems that right around noon, people are going to have a little bit of downtime, but then right before 1 o'clock, when it's time to come back to work, there's a spike again, and then there's a spike at the end of the day, right? And so it helps us to profile our network, helps us to figure out what our needs are. Okay, some weeks ago we discussed tools which are used in order to monitor the network. Let's see, I believe it was back in chapter 9 or so. Okay, and I brought up a couple of systems here, like Oracle Enterprise Manager or the Microsoft System Center Operations Manager. These systems allow you to monitor individual servers and create baselines, because they will continue monitoring them when the activity is normal. They'll create a graph for you, and so later you can compare that graph to when people are saying it's slow. So then you know what that means. Of course, you can use these to monitor also network switches, and that's done with SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol, right? So you can tell how many packets is the average throughput, what's the average size of the packet, and that information is going to help you to profile the network well. There's also an extension to SNMP. Did you notice in the textbook what that protocol is called? So SNMP is sort of the basic way of connecting to devices and finding out how they're doing. But the textbook talks about the Remote Network Monitoring Protocol. And RMON is a way to sample routers and switches through a wide area network. Okay, and so you can collect that information to complete the view of your network. All right, so these systems will help us to profile the network and to create the baseline type graphs. Okay, let's see. So for a moment, let's talk about the type of statistics that we may want to collect about a network. I created a link in our course here to a website called Pingdom. Have you ever heard about Pingdom? All right, Pingdom is a hosted system, so it's a cloud system, which is going to externally, okay, collect information about your servers, about the speed with which they respond. They're going to also alert you when something goes wrong, right? And they'll create those kinds of profiles like we discussed. It's often important to include external systems like these ones in addition to our own Oracle On-Premise Manager and so forth. There's this idea in science, the observer effect, or the Heisenberg effect. Okay, and what this particular let's see, information technology. What this particular phenomenon talks about is that when you are observing something, anything really, you're modifying its behavior. Okay, imagine maybe watching a kid, and the kid knows he's being watched. He's going to act differently. Or maybe employees are being reviewed, and so while they're being watched, they're going to act differently than when they're not. Systems will do the same, because when you're running an agent on your system, okay, a lot of times you take resources away from the system to run it, right? And network capacity too. The busier the system gets, the more information the agent sometimes is sending out to the collection system. So that's the observer effect. Otherwise, this is called, let me see. Yeah. Heisenberg effect. There we go. Right? So that's the same idea that if you are observing something, you actually are modifying its behavior. So that's why Pingdom and some of these externally hosted systems are a good idea. Let's look at their tools. Under tools, they right away say, hey, why not just try it? So we can go ahead and put in maybe www.grcc.edu. And this system does nothing else but visits a web page like any client would, any browser. But what it's able to do is it takes your website apart, and based on the time, that's very realistic because they're actually located in England, so they go through a number of routers in between. So this is how much time it takes for any of those elements to be loaded, right? And then it shows also their sequence of loading. All right. Further, they're going to come up with some recommendations, okay? And then we have some analysis being done, and then we can actually even see history, okay, if there are measurements done across time. So Pingdom is one example of how you can measure your network and your servers from outside. Some of the statistics that you want to collect about your network are, for example, the mean time between failures, right? Mean time between failures. In a factory, often they are going to write down how many days since the last accident, right? And so mean time between failures, it's going to be an important metric that that we need to consider. Then the other metrics have to do with availability. Today on the internet, especially when we have cloud computing involved, and I know that some of you expressed at the beginning of the semester interest in cloud computing, availability is a huge deal, because if I'm going to rely on Google giving me storage, or if I'm going to rely on email from Google, or Amazon gives me some kind of a service, I want to know how reliable it is. Okay, reliability is actually a different metric, but availability is typically what we look at. And cloud computing systems and companies advertise 5 nines, right? So 99.999. But the way they sometimes calculate it is, if they schedule downtime and they say, okay, today we're going to have 2 hours of downtime, they don't include that as part of the calculation because it was scheduled downtime. So they only include unscheduled downtime in the availability calculation. And of course, what you do is you take the total time that you are available minus the downtime, right? And then you divide that by the total time, and then you know how many nines of availability you actually have. All right, how about mean time to repair? What does that metric do? MTTR, mean time to repair. Very good, yeah. And actually, in an Oracle database, the MTTR is a value that you can set, because the shorter period of time to repair, the more disk space the database needs to store its temporary changes. Okay, so MTTR is used that way as well. Okay, so having those metrics, we can profile our network and provide some information to the analysts for future upgrades and needs analysis. Okay, one more thing I want to talk about are protocol analyzers. In the past, we looked at sniffers and we talked about Wireshark. So sometimes you want to look at your network, whether it's in the maintenance phase, which includes monitoring, or in any of the parts of the upgrade or change phases, and you want to know what type of protocols are running. Okay, maybe you can save bandwidth if you're going to profile your network. There's a system out there called Packeteer, and it allows you to say, for everybody using this type of traffic, okay, you can have very high availability, large bandwidth. But if you're trying to do peer-to-peer sharing, or if you're trying to do FTP, then suddenly we're going to give you very little bandwidth. See, and so then you can give the bandwidth where it's most needed. Okay, so that's the idea of, or the main ideas behind chapter 13. I'll go ahead and